Hello, everybody. How you all doing? Yeah, I'll take woo as a good answer. All right, we're going to talk about tech, civil rights, and politics. Not a lot of time to do that, so let's get going. They told me that I should start, and then I'm gonna open it up here. I have an interesting, controversial opinion about tech and civil rights, and what's in the news a lot lately, which is Facebook and how they're infringing upon our rights and our privacy. I'm an enormous believer in privacy, but I believe that part of what's happening there is that the mainstream media is attacking Facebook for competitive reasons. So be wary of what you hear about that. I think Cambridge Analytica is real. I think the Russian interference was real. But it is also being massively overhyped by mainstream media to attack their competitors, Facebook and YouTube. And they're actively going one by one to all their advertisers and saying basically, isn't Facebook and YouTube terrible? Shouldn't you advertise with us instead? And they're using their so-called reporters to do that. So that is among the myriad of issues that we're going to solve in the next 20 some odd minutes. So Susan, I know that you have an expansive view of the civil liberties issues at hand here, being at the ACLU president. Boy, you guys are busy. So let us know what your point of view on this is.
Okay, my point of view, there are some tech issues that I think we'd want to talk about. But the ACLU, as you may know, works in 14 different areas of civil rights and civil liberties, of which our concerns about what Facebook is doing and surveillance and so forth is only one. So at the same time, it seems that the Trump administration also works in 14 areas of civil rights and civil liberties, just in the opposite direction. So since the inauguration, we have brought 138 lawsuits against the Trump administration, ranging from, thank you, I hope you're all members, card carrying.
Can I see 139?
Yeah, that may have already happened while we're talking here. But you're ranging from the travel ban to trans people in the military to heartbreaking stories about refugees who are being separated from their small children because the government is trying to deter people from coming into this country as refugees. So we have civil liberties concerns across the board, but I want to introduce at the beginning, and this is not just about tech, my greatest concern is the turn to authoritarianism, not only in the United States, but around the world. And so the founder of the ACLU, Roger Baldwin, said that no civil liberties battle ever remains won. And we've become accustomed to seeing the pendulum swing on civil liberties. And my concern is that the pendulum isn't going to be able to swing if the pillars of authoritarianism begin to take root here. And those are erosion of free speech. You can't criticize the government. Demonization of ethnic groups and immigrants, something that all authoritarian regimes do. And finally, and perhaps the most important, the distortion of our democracy so that a minority of people in this country can actually maintain control of all branches of the government, even though they're a minority because they've been putting so many thumbs on the scale. And tech is part of the issue there, but not all of the issue. There's been so much going on. Tech is responsible maybe for not looking enough at election hacking or the algorithms of gerrymandering. But the problem of voter suppression and the distortion of democracy, I think, is enormous. So that's my very brief overview.
Yeah, as we all know, Donald Trump has paper-thin skin, so he gets to criticize and insult and berate everyone else. But the minute a comedian, for example, Michelle Wolf, criticizes him or anyone that works for him, all of a sudden, we got to shut it down. We have to shut down the entire White House Correspondents' Dinner. Washington Post is lobbying for Amazon. We got to shut it down. He wants to shut down everything. If you think it can't happen here, just go to any museum in your local city. There's a Great Tolerance Museum in LA where I live, and see what happened in the 1930s in Germany. And it's not that dissimilar. The beginnings are not at all dissimilar. Attack all of your opponents, threaten to lock them up, and eventually lock them up. So what we're facing here is a unique challenge, and we all have to rise to that challenge. So now, Andrew, you're rising to it in a different way.
Yes.
You're running for president, presumably against Trump, if he gets there.
Yes.
But you weren't in politics before. You're not a politician.
No.
You were in business. So what on God's green earth propelled you to do this?
Well, I started an organization called Venture for America, which has been here in New Orleans for 6 years. So I've been here every year for the last 6 years. Thank you, VFA New Orleans. And we helped create thousands of jobs around the country, but my time in these cities made it clear to me that automation has done a number, has really blasted a lot of communities, particularly in the Midwest, to a point where they voted for Trump this past election. We automated away. Technology is directly responsible for Trump's election, but not in the way most people think. We automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, essentially his margin for victory. That's why he's our president today. It's driving the political and social dysfunction. And we're about to do the same thing to truck drivers, retail workers, call center workers, cashiers, fast food workers. I have many friends in Silicon Valley, and the more they know, the more concerned they are, the more confident they are that artificial intelligence is quickly getting to a point where it's going to transform industries. There's still 2.5 million call center workers in the United States today. The day that AI gets better than the average call center worker, we're going to see that job category virtually disappear. So this is the greatest challenge right now. It's driving all of our dysfunctional social issues and political issues. It's even driving, in my opinion, racism and misogyny. And the way we undo it is by spreading a mindset of abundance back to the American people through the freedom dividend of $1,000 per American adult per month, paid for by a new value-added tax on the companies that are benefiting the most from automation. So as much as I appreciate, because I went to law school back in the day, I was an attorney for 5 months, but to me, economics drives everything else. Like, you can't denounce hatred or fix people's spirits without trying to remedy the conditions that are causing the problems in the first place.
So Andrew and I went to the same law school, different times, and I was an attorney for 7 months. So between us, we got a whole year of legal experience.
We're qualified together.
We'll take legal questions later. Susan, you were saying.
Well, I wanted to follow up on what Andrew was saying, because in terms of the economic origins of the problem is that it's far more difficult than it should be for Andrew or anybody else to win an election from the Democratic side, because currently Republicans control most of the lawmaking regimes in all the states, and they are working as hard as they can to disenfranchise poor people and minorities, et cetera, through all sorts of cynical laws, voter ID laws, and making it hard to register, making it hard to vote, and really deterring people. And there have now been studies showing that it's working. In Wisconsin, they discouraged over 11% of people who had voted in the last election from voting in this presidential election by just making it too hard. So it seems to me that, again, we're, I think, caught in a catch-22. But it's really difficult to have regime change when the current regime is trying to lock in their power.
Well, 59% of Americans today cannot pay an unexpected $500 bill. To me, there's a mindset of scarcity that has taken hold over the majority of the country, and the only way to combat that is by making it so they can pay a $500 bill. And so we have to, right now, in my mind, scarcity is winning about 60-40 in this country, and we need to invert that. We need to get it back to a mindset of abundance. I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs around the country, and we know that many of you here in this room resemble this. Entrepreneurship is born of a mindset of possibility and abundance and optimism about the future, and that's out of reach for more and more Americans. It's unrealistic, and we have to make it realistic again. It all starts there.
So, Andrew,
Thank you. Yang2020.com.
Yeah. So, Andrew, you talk about a couple of issues that Bernie Sanders talks about. Not being able to survive the $500 law, which is amazing, by the way, because I think that for a lot of the people in this room, that seems
unthinkable. Yeah,
that seems unthinkable, that $500 knocks you out, bankrupt. You can't, that's it, you're done. That's 6 out of 10 every Americans. Isn't that amazing? Our federal minimum wage right now is $7.25. You know what that is per year? If you work a full year, $15,000 a year. Okay? So this is unthinkable, and the wages are deeply suppressed, and that is why a rage is building that I think a lot of people are unaware of.
Yes.
You talk about basic income. Bernie Sanders just introduced that legislation. So are you running to the left of him?
Well, so what I've seen, and I agree with Bernie Sanders on many, many of the central diagnoses of the problems. As much as I'm for the fact that no American should work and still be suffering in poverty, the reality is if we were to elevate a minimum wage to $15, it would just hasten the automation of many of these jobs. Fast food, for example, pays about $8 an hour. If you push that to $15, you're going to see a total wipeout of fast food workers, because the public company CEOs will take that as their big catalyst to jettison many, many workers. So we need to skip the middleman and just put money directly into the hands of American citizens and consumers. A basic income of $1,000 a month would create 4.5 million new jobs and would grow the economy by 2.5 trillion in perpetuity. So if that's to the left of Bernie Sanders, then I would agree with it. I actually think Bernie agrees with the spirit of basic income, but he just hasn't brought himself to a point where he'll say it out loud. So I will say it out loud. We need universal basic income in this country, and I would love it if Bernie Sanders would just come out and say the same thing.
Okay. Well, on universal basic income, he just introduced legislation, so mission accomplished. So, Susan, in the mainstream media, we hear nonstop, he said, she said, everybody's the same. Now, Trump is so out of control that finally they said, okay, all right, he's a little different, right? But they will normally say the Republicans and Democrats are, say this and say that, and they're equal. In terms of civil rights, which is, of course, your forte, your organization's forte, is that true, or is one party more likely to take away your civil rights than the other?
Well, the ACLU is nonpartisan, but I actually have to say it's hard to know what it means to be nonpartisan these days when the occupant of the White House is a major threat to almost all of our civil liberties. So this, to me, is not about party and whose civil liberties views align with ours. But I think that we also are doing some work on elections for the first time. We're going to be active in connection with the midterm elections by trying to educate everybody about the policies, the civil liberties policies of all candidates for all different races, Republicans, Democrats, judges, whoever. And what we're hoping to do is to get people who care about civil liberties to inform themselves and then really turn out the vote for whichever of the candidates is a pro-civil liberties candidate. Yeah, I think part of the problem, what you're describing, Cenk, is that the mainstream media have all their points of view. But I think the problem is that there's almost, everyone's in their own echo chamber. Either you're watching Fox News or you're watching MSNBC or CNN, and people are just hearing different things. So if we were still in the world where we all got our news from Walter Cronkite or the New York Times, then we could be arguing about, is Walter Cronkite properly balanced? That would matter a whole lot more than I think it does now. I think we have these sort of shadow governments in Facebook and other places that are distorting our speech and distorting the marketplace of ideas.
Right, and so to Susan's point earlier on taking away voting rights, for example, Chris Kobach got caught with his hand in the cookie jar by a judge. He's the Secretary of State for Kansas, and they had disenfranchised over 18,000 voters in just one area of Kansas and not allowed them to get their voter ID like they were supposed to when they were registering for their driver's license. And she asked, okay, well then how many people did voter fraud that you're disenfranchising 18,000 people and you'd like to do it to hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people in Kansas? And the evidence they presented was 3 people over 12 years in Kansas.
Yeah.
It is a non-existent problem. That's why when you hear false equivalency from the mainstream media, don't believe the hype. The Republicans do want to suppress the vote. That is their goal. Voter fraud is largely a myth and almost always done by the Republicans. So, and sometimes the facts are quote-unquote partisan because that is a fact. That's an absolute fact, and a judge held them in contempt of court. So, look, the most important thing, whether we're talking about tech, politics, and civil rights, is get educated on it. If you find out the real issues and where people stand on it, I think that and the parties and the individuals, you'll be in way better shape. Well, Andrew, I wanted to ask you about a specific issue that's going to be very relevant to you in your run. Because when you look at all the issues, my thesis is that the number one issue is money in politics.
Yes,
so
yeah.
We have legalized corruption. We used to call it bribery, but now it's called a campaign contribution or an independent expenditure. I believe that America, unfortunately, has become perhaps the most corrupt nation on earth because in other countries, it's still illegal to bribe people, and you could get caught, and there could be consequences. Here, we've legalized bribery and made it systemic. So, Andrew, I assume you don't have millions of dollars or billions of dollars in your back pocket. So how in the world would you compete in a world where bribery is allowed and they could just give literally billions of dollars to your opponents?
That's the fun thing about this campaign where I show people on my phone where I get donations, $5 from an unemployed guy in Montana, $20 from a student in Florida, $12 from a housewife in Minnesota. And I get them every day, and it's incredibly empowering and invigorating. It gets me and Zach and the rest of my team charged up. So the campaign just grows by leaps and bounds every day. How many of you all are for Yang 2020? Yes. Excellent. So every day, more and more people come, and it's the same way Bernie grew his campaign. What was the average contribution?
$27.
Yes. So we still live in a democracy. We can still make universal basic income a reality if enough of us band together and say this is what we want as a people. And our campaign's demonstrating that there is still a place for the citizen's voice in democracy here in 2018 and 2020.
But if I could add to that, it seems to me, Andrew's talking about results that we'd like to reach, and the question is still, how in the world do you get there? So one answer is to try to get around the money in politics problem. I would love to see public financing of elections so that you shouldn't have to depend on how much money you have.
Yeah.
Public financing. Okay, so how do you get there? I keep coming back to the fact that there are all these thumbs on the scale now, and no matter what a majority of people, even if you could convince a majority of people in the country to agree with you on everything, you couldn't get elected without a supermajority because of the Electoral College and the gerrymandering and the statutes. So let me give you something that you can all do. The ACLU has a community organizing program now called People Power. So look at the ACLU website, People Power, and our current campaign is called Let People Vote. And we have strategies designed for each state where you can actually work with a whole lot of other volunteers on trying to improve access to democracy. So whatever results you think we should have or you want to vote for, you'll be able to, and you can have a majority of people who actually would cause a victory.
But I agree with you that Citizens United is destroying our democracy. We need to get money out of politics as fast as possible. And as president, I would push for a constitutional amendment to make that happen because we need to restore a sense of functionality to our government. It's going to destroy us if we don't get it together.
See, we're an action panel. Now Andrew's giving you a way to get involved, so is Susan, and I'll give you one too. So I started a group called Wolfpack, and their sole mission is to get an amendment to get money out of politics.
Yes.
So wolf-pack.com. So wolf-pack.com. The two main things there is you have to end the private financing of elections. Everybody knows that if you do private financing, the politicians will serve private interests. They're not giving that money for their health. On the tax holiday in 2004, corporations that gave to politicians got a 24,000% rate of return on their investments. Their investments were our representatives. So you've got to end the private financing and do public financing, as Susan pointed out.
Here.
And number two, this absurdity that corporations are people. Raise your hand if you think a corporation is a human being. Let the record note that no one raised their hand. I've asked this in front of, tens of thousands of people. No one has ever raised their hand. It's preposterous. They do not have constitutional rights. They are not endowed by their creator with inalienable rights. We're their creator, and we need to take our government back from the monsters that we have created.
May I raise my hand to make one final point? I'm going to do a Q&A at 2:30, so if anybody wants to know about the ACLU's 13 other areas, I'd be happy to see you there.
At the Q&A, so everybody make sure you check that out. I'll be back at center stage at 4 o'clock. We're going to talk about jobs. Andrew, you mentioned that, and that was powerful. And we're going to talk more about how tech is affecting that, more on automation. So I hope you guys can come back. You've been a great audience. Thank you so much, guys. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.